Welcome to this deep dive curated just for you. You shared some excerpts from Isaiah, chapters 37 to 39, about King Hezekiah. And while we're ready to jump in, we're talking about a king facing these impossible odds with the Assyrian army breathing down Jerusalem's neck, an army known for its ruthlessness.
Yeah, it's a situation that really throws you back in time. It's not just any army here. The Assyrians, they were infamous for making examples of their enemies. And the psychological warfare they waged was just as terrifying as their military strength.
Oh, absolutely. And we see that play out in Isaiah. This Assyrian official Rabshakeh, he shows up outside the city walls and he just starts shouting these insults and threats. It's like something out of a movie, trying to demoralize the people of Jerusalem and get them to just completely doubt their God.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that he goes beyond just simple threats.
Yeah.
He invokes the names of other gods, other nations that the Assyrians had conquered. He's trying to dismantle the foundation of Hezekiah's faith, that belief that the God of Israel is unique and powerful.
Right. And how does Hezekiah react at first? He tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth, basically the ancient version of public mourning. He's obviously shaken to his core.
Yeah, which, makes sense. He's a king, but he's also a man of faith. His entire understanding of the world, his kingship, everything is built on this belief that God will protect his people.
Yeah.
And now that belief is being directly challenged.
Publicly and humiliatingly.
Exactly.
But Hezekiah doesn't just give in to despair. What does he do? He takes his fear, his doubt, and he lays it all out before God in prayer.
And this prayer is not just like a generic plea for help. He gets very specific. He reminds God of his own faithfulness, the covenant promises that God made to David. He appeals to God's reputation, saying, don't let these pagans think that their gods are stronger than you. It's bigger than just him or Judah. This is about God's glory, his name being known throughout the world.
There's almost a boldness there, a willingness to reason with God that's really intriguing. He's actively engaging with God, laying out his case.
It's a reminder that prayer is not just about asking for things. It's about a relationship, a dialogue. It's about bringing our whole selves, our fears, doubts, hopes before God and trusting in his response.
And what a response it is. The prophet Isaiah shows up with this message from God. He basically tells Hezekiah, don't worry, I've got this. The language is incredible. God describes putting a hook in Sennacherib's nose and turning him back like a stubborn ox.
It's almost like God's kind of amused at this Assyrian king thinking he can challenge the Almighty.
Right. And what's interesting is the level of detail in God's response. He doesn't just promise a vague victory. He describes how Sennacherib will be forced to retreat.
Yeah.
He even foreshadows his assassination by his own sons. God's making it absolutely clear who is in control.
Oh, yeah, he is.
And then we get this incredible scene. The angel of the Lord wipes out 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night.
It's an event that sparked debate for centuries. Some people view it as like a literal act of divine intervention, while others interpret it more symbolically, maybe representing a plague or some other natural disaster that decimated the Assyrian army.
It really makes you think about how we understand God's role in the world. Is it always this dramatic and overt, or are there more subtle ways that God's power is at work?
That's a question for the ages, I think. But regardless of how we interpret it, the impact on Hezekiah and Judah is undeniable. That threat that seemed so overwhelming is gone. The siege is lifted and Jerusalem is saved.
It's this moment of pure relief and celebration for Judah, but then, almost like a plot twist, the story takes a personal turn. Hezekiah falls deathly ill.
It's almost a reminder that even in these moments of national triumph, life can throw you a curveball.
Yeah.
Here's Hezekiah. He just faced down the might of this whole empire, and now he's confronted with his own mortality.
And this time the threat isn't an invading army, but a fatal illness. Isaiah comes to Hezekiah and delivers this really grim message. Set your house in order because you're gonna die.
Can you imagine receiving that news, Hezekiah, who had shown such strength and faith in the face of the Assyrians? Now he's weeping, pleading with God for his life.
And his prayer in this moment, it's so raw, so vulnerable. He reminds God how he's walked faithfully, how he's done what's right. You can just feel the desperation in his words as he begs for more time.
And what's striking is that, unlike that encounter with the Assyrians, there's no grand display of power this time. God simply tells Isaiah to go back to Hezekiah and tell him that his prayer has been heard. He will have 15 more years added to his life.
It's a much quieter, more intimate kind of miracle.
Definitely, but no less powerful. And to solidify this promise, God provides a sign. The shadow on the sundial, it moves backwards 10 steps.
Yeah. Speaking of that sign, it's interesting to consider its symbolic significance. You have the sundial, which represents the passage of time being reversed. Could that be a metaphor for God's ability to interrupt, to change the course of events, even defy the natural order of things?
That's a really interesting thought.
Hezekiah is obviously overjoyed by this. He breaks out into a song of thanksgiving, praising God for his mercy, vowing to cherish every remaining day. This brush with death has given him a new appreciation for life.
There's a profound shift in his perspective. He faced death and came back, and that changes you. It makes you reassess what's really important, your priorities, your values, what matters.
But the story takes another turn. Envoys arrive from Babylon, and Hezekiah may be feeling a little too good about himself after his recent victories, decides to show off.
Yeah, this is where we see that human side of Hezekiah. The potential for pride to creep in even after those profound moments of humility and dependence on God.
He parades these envoys through his palace, showing off all his treasures, his wealth, his military might. It's almost as if he's saying, look what I've accomplished. Look how blessed I am.
And this act of pride, this need for validation, has consequences. The prophet Isaiah shows up, and his message is a stark contrast to that good news he had delivered earlier.
Yeah, Isaiah delivers this prophecy that foreshadows a future of captivity and loss for Judah. He tells Hezekiah that everything he just showed off, all that wealth, those treasures, it'll all be carried off to Babylon one day.
And even more devastating, Isaiah predicts that some of Hezekiah's own descendants will be taken captive and become eunuchs in the Babylonian king's palace. A real fall from grace.
It's a harsh reminder that nothing in this world is permanent. The highs of victory and prosperity can be fleeting. Even the greatest kings are subject to the tides of fortune. So how does Hezekiah react to this prophecy? You'd think he'd be crushed.
Surprisingly, he seems to take it in stride. He focuses on the fact that peace and truth will continue during his lifetime.
It's almost like he's saying, well, at least I'm good for now, but it does raise some questions.
Absolutely. Is Hezekiah being short-sighted? Is he choosing to ignore the long-term consequences of his actions? Or is there a deeper wisdom in accepting what you can't control and focusing on the present moment?
It's a complex reaction. It leaves us with a lot to ponder. On the one hand, you can admire his resilience, his ability to find peace in the midst of uncertainty. But on the other hand, you can't help but wonder if he's being a little naive, maybe even irresponsible.
I think that's what's so fascinating about this part of Hezekiah's story. It forces us to grapple with these difficult questions. There are no easy answers. It's about wrestling with human nature, the balance between present peace and future consequences.
And I think it speaks to the larger themes of Isaiah. We see this tension between judgment and hope, between the consequences of sin and the promise of God's faithfulness. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always that glimmer of light, a reason to keep going.
And speaking of that glimmer of light, maybe we should move on to that final chapter of Hezekiah's story.
It feels like we've been on this journey with Hezekiah, from facing down that terrifying army to confronting his own mortality and then this prophecy about the future exile for Judah. What a whirlwind.
What strikes me is how this one story from ancient Judah can still feel so relevant today. We might not be dealing with invading armies or miraculous healings, but the core themes are timeless. Faith, pride, the consequences of our choices, those resonate.
It really makes you think how Hezekiah's story might resonate with someone listening right now, facing their own challenges.
Imagine you're dealing with something that feels completely overwhelming. Maybe a health crisis, a major setback at work. Hezekiah's response to the Assyrian threat can offer some real insight.
You're talking about when he turns to prayer, it's not just like a passive plea. It's a real back and forth with God laying out all his fears, his hopes, even challenging God.
Exactly. Hezekiah reminds us that prayer can be this really active, even defiant act of faith, bringing our whole selves to God, not just some perfect version of ourselves.
And then there's that resilience. He goes from the depths of despair to this miraculous healing, only to be confronted with a prophecy of future hardship. What an emotional roller coaster.
Hezekiah's ability to bounce back, to find peace and gratitude, even when things are so uncertain, that's a powerful lesson for us all. Life is going to throw those curveballs. It's how we respond that defines us.
It makes you think about how we deal with setbacks. Do we let them crush us, or do we find a way to keep going, to find meaning, even in the midst of difficulty?
It's a question we all have to answer. But Hezekiah's story gives us a powerful example of what it means to live with faith, with courage, and with resilience.
And even though Hezekiah is held up as this righteous king, he's not without his flaws. That whole episode with the Babylonian envoys showing off all his wealth, his treasures, it reveals his pride, that need for validation, and it leads to consequences.
It's a reminder that even the most faithful among us are human. We have those moments of weakness. our blind spots.
And it makes that final prophecy with the prediction of exile so poignant. Knowing what's coming, that his descendants will face hardship, does it change how we view Hezekiah's decision to just focus on the peace of the present?
That's the question, isn't it? Is he wise to just appreciate the good while he has it? Or is there a level of denial, maybe even selfishness? It's a question with no easy answers, but I hope it stays with you after this deep dive.
It definitely has me thinking. Hezekiah's story holds a mirror up to our own lives, our own choices. How do we balance enjoying the present while preparing for the future? How do we make decisions that are good not just for us, but for those who come after us? Tough questions, but that's what makes these deep dives so worthwhile.
I think that's the beauty of these ancient texts. They're not just stories from the past. They challenge us, they inspire us, and they make us look at our lives in new ways.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Hezekiah, I want to leave you with this. What will you take away from his story? What lessons will you carry with you as you go? Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring.